thought we'd go into the sort of Trump-Zelensky-Ukraine meeting. There was this sort of full press conference that I won't play a clip of because everyone's seen at least the 15 minutes of contentious exchange here that ensued because President Trump invited Zelensky over to the White House. He made fun of the fact that he wasn't wearing a suit for a little bit, and then cancelled the ensuing proper press conference where they were going to announce that the minerals deal was going to be signed because Zelensky wouldn't sign it then, and he got into an argument with Vance and Trump. We saw an outpouring of support for Zelensky, mainly accompanied with the customary ill-fitting Churchill comparisons by European leaders who, let's be frank, can't do anything without America's say-so. So what was your read on the situation? Was Zelensky trying to pry the EU apart from America because he thought that the EU might go rogue and commit more military support to Ukraine's war effort? Was he making a show of it for the cameras? Did he fumble the bag? What do you think about this entire kerfuffle?
Well, if we would argue that this was a strategic move to kind of get the Europeans to step up, I think one problem that you and your viewers and listeners know very well, and that has also been discussed on your show very eloquently on numerous times, is do the Europeans, and I would actually include the UK if I may in this as well, do we actually have the capacity to step up? So if you would be a hypothetical country, let's just put Ukraine to the side for a second, and you say, I have the choice between the United States or the European Union, hypothetically, plus the UK as my main support, which one would you pick? I mean, forget about the president and whether you like him or not, always just from a pure strengths perspective. Like which one of these countries is, or group of countries and the singular country is more powerful? And I think the United States, this is what they have shown now under Trump, is that they are still quite powerful. And the steps that Trump is taking domestically, even though some people accuse his administration of being isolationist, my belief is it will make the United States stronger domestically. And very often, if you get stronger at home, you automatically get stronger abroad, right? Because your spine is strengthened, so to speak, so you can do much more abroad. I have for a very long time, and I'm actually curious, Connor, to hear your take on this. I have for a very long time made the argument that imperialism, in whatever form, is the consequence of domestic strength. So the reason why Britain ended up with an empire is not because once they woke up and say, let's get out there and make an empire, it is because Britain conquered the steam engine, Britain conquered child mortality, right? Britain conquered the demographic problem in the early days. So all of a sudden you had an economic surplus, you had a people surplus, and you had then also a military surplus. So it was almost unavoidable that the British would become an imperial power because you were so much stronger than anybody else. And I think the same is potentially true for the United States. If Trump is truly capable of creating the second golden age for the US, they cannot be isolationist because they will be so powerful that they will be dragged either voluntarily or involuntarily in conflicts all around the world. This has always been the case, which is why I always dislike when people say, well, if the United States would be replaced as the number one by China, if they would be replaced by India, then we would have a global hegemon that doesn't intervene. But the global hegemon, no matter who it is, will always intervene because that's the nature of being a global hegemon. So Zelensky's bet to have the somewhat weak Europeans step in for the much stronger Americans, if that was the case, I think was a mistaken step. One headline, I'm sure you saw it as well, in the New York Post caught my eye. So I don't want to spread conspiracy theories because I don't want to make your show end sooner than it's supposed to be. But one headline was that apparently he met with Chris Murphy and a couple of other Democrats. And they advised him, again, I'm just repeating what the New York Post article said, they advised him not to take any deal. And if he did that, first of all, that was strategically a mistake, because if there's one thing that Democrats do not want to see at any point is that Donald Trump succeeds in brokering a peace deal, because every promise he keeps is, of course, diminishing the electoral prospects of the Democrats. So there might be something to that as well. And if you look at these 50 minutes, Zelensky, whatever one thinks about him, there is a belligerent attitude. This was then completely picked up by J.D. Vance. I had the impression that for most of the conversation, Trump was quite calm. It was only towards the last 10 minutes that he really jumped into the conversation. He seemed to be the adult in the room. But there was a certain bellicosity on part of Zelensky that I think one cannot deny. Sorry for the very, very long answer.
No, don't apologize. That's why I brought you on, Ralph. We've got more than enough time to explore this. I think you're right. So with Zelensky, one thing that I picked up on was his unwillingness, or perhaps incapacity, to distinguish between the United States and Donald Trump. He could distinguish between them when it was election season, and he showed up with Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania campaigning for the opposition, as J.D. Vance mentioned, for the Biden-Harris administration, who had given him untold billions of dollars, even more so than Europe, and Europe's contributions to the Ukraine war effort is dwarfed by the fact that they're paying Russia more for gas exports than they're giving Ukraine in armaments and aid. But he was able to distinguish between Trump and America then, but he was unable to distinguish when a Ukrainian reporter, I believe it was, asked, do you think President Trump supports Ukraine? Obviously trying to drive the wedge between them, suggesting that Trump's sympathies lie with Russia because he had accused Zelensky of being a dictator before and has tried to butter up Putin a little bit in the same way he did with Kim Jong-un to bring him to the negotiating table and make him more likely to make concessions because the Biden administration never even picked up the phone to him to try and settle the war before. And Zelensky had said, America has our back. America, America, America. Whereas Trump later on in the conversation, when Zelensky had picked the fight, Trump had said, the stupid president, my predecessor who came before me, gave you hundreds of billions of dollars for an unwinnable war, and I'm in charge now. So Trump was dealing with Zelensky as a person who is a proxy for a nation. Zelensky was acting as if he is dealing with a nation with, no matter who the leader is, they're all beholden to a rules-based international order, which sees Zelensky as a beleaguered Churchill figure and Putin is indistinguishable from Hitler, and so all they're doing is on rails rerunning World War II, and he was frustrated that Trump did not want to defeat Putin/Hitler. And so he wasn't dealing with Trump as a person, whereas Trump does politics very personally, and so that was why Zelensky walked into that total blind. It wasn't just that he was briefed by Democrats and campaigned for Democrats, but he was engaging with Trump as if he is just the indistinguishable, interchangeable figurehead for America as part of the rules-based international order, rather than dealing with Trump as a man with specific business interests and her country with specific business interests that would have given Ukraine military security by proxy of giving economic security. Do you think I have a correct read on that?
Yes. No, I think you have a correct read on it. And because you have a correct read on it, that's why I was so surprised by the meeting. Because whatever one thinks about Trump, he's not an unknown figure. This man has been in public life, was as an entertainer, as a businessman, and now as a politician for quite a while. So if I'm Zelensky or the advisor to Zelensky, I say, listen, we go to the United States, and pretty much I would have told him precisely what you just said. He has a personal approach to politics. He has a transactional approach to diplomacy. He likes it when people wear a suit. So Zelensky could have gone in there and say, Mr. President, I know we kind of started off on the wrong foot during the election campaign. This is what also J.D. Vance brought up, right? The campaigning with Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry for this. Let's turn the page, make a fresh start. The Ukrainian people are forever grateful for what the United States have done. I'm personally grateful for what you have done starting in 2016 with delivering javelins instead of sheets, which is also something that Trump mentioned in that conversation. And let's try to get the best possible deal out for my people and for Ukraine. And we are happy to support any suggestion that you have. If he would have gone in like this, I think all of this would have gone into a different direction. And one could say, no, this is what you hear also on some British media say, no, he's, as you say, a Churchillian figure. He's beleaguered by Russia, so he has to go in like a rocket, like staunch and offensive. But the problem is diplomacy means not that you have to approve of the character of the other side, but you have to understand it in order to get the best possible deal. And what we saw, I think, with Zelensky was that either he didn't know, either he wasn't prepped in the best possible way, or he really thought that he's calling the shots. But if you know Trump, and everybody in this world knows Trump because Trump talks a lot and has been in the public light for a long time, it was pretty clear that this is not going to fly. So this was what I'm always also, and I think you feel the same way, there is a moral dimension to this conflict, but that's not the only dimension. And for most people, for Ukraine, this war is about Ukraine. But the further you go to the west from Ukraine, the less it is kind of about Ukraine. In the European left, I would argue, and the same is true with the British left, this is finally the one good war they can support. But I think it's more about them than it is about Ukraine. And for the United States, this war is much more about what it means for the United States than it means for Ukraine. So the mistake that I saw in Zelensky's part was that he apparently believed, again, I don't want to put it, psychology from afar is always problematic. So I say this with all caution, but that he believes that the entire world sees this conflict in the way that he sees it. But that's simply not the case. That is never the case in wars. There's always different layers of interests by the parties that are involved, that none of them sees it the same way. And good diplomacy means that you understand how the different parties view the conflict and try to get the best possible outcome and get them, however, on your side. And I think getting Trump on your side would not have been that difficult. And yet people mock when the argument was made, can he not wear a suit? Well, but I think it's a fair question, because if you know that the other guy thinks the suit is important, why don't you just put on the damn suit? If this could really make a difference in these conversations and in these diplomatic negotiations. So I think you were right. Everything you said, I would fully agree with.
The suit, I think, is also a proxy for the fact that lots of people are getting the impression that a lot of this conflict is stage managed. Not that the conflict is fake, but that the optics of it have been curated for an American mainstream media and an international press, the likes of Le Monde or DW or any of the Times in the UK, the sort of pro neoconservative or neoliberal intervention, pro democracy as an abstract value, which they see Ukraine v Russia as a proxy conflict for, and pro all of the institutions, cultural, like Hollywood or Vogue magazine or any of these places that Zelensky has pandered to and brought into Ukraine as part of the optics battle. The institutions that espouse that worldview, which is why you had Ben Stiller wandering around Ukraine and did that inappropriate Vogue shoot with his missus a couple of months in. And I think that messaging disconnect is why the exact kind of people that the likes of Keir Starmer, saber rattling as he will, even though he can get away with trying to talk tough without actually having to do anything because he's going to have to defer to the US. But the kinds of people that Keir Starmer has in mind when he says we're going to deploy troops in the UK, because if you're going to rely on the fighting age men of Europe and your countries to go to war for the abstract ideal of democracy and die in some ditch in Ukraine, then you're going to run into two problems. And I wonder if you'll agree with me on this, because we've spoken about it before, I think, on Talk together. The first problem is not just that Gen Z is particularly diverse, and so lots of people will not feel that the constituent nations of Europe are their home because their parents didn't come from there. And so at the first sign of conscription will flee back to wherever in the third world their families are descended from. But because for the situated peoples of Europe, the young people of Europe, they don't feel particularly anchored to either the abstract notion of democracy or to their civilizations. The abstract notion of democracy has been running on exhaust fumes, particularly during the COVID period, which you pointed out when we were on Peter Cardwell's show a little while ago, because overnight, all of our beliefs about the rule of law and accountability can be dissolved away with a press conference as martial law is declared, and unprecedented legal restrictions on speech and movement are imposed for indefinite months on end by the likes of Boris Johnson or the German government at the time, including vaccine mandates, which are incredibly intrusive and violate all sorts of mantras about individual liberty and bodily autonomy. But also, young people find it more difficult to get a house, are indefinitely deferring their time at which they have a family, are questioning the fundamental axioms on which their civilization is founded on, told it's irredeemably racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. So, and if you're a straight white man, you're told yourself that you are an ambassador of the patriarchy, that you are racist, and that you should be excluded from positions in business, in the government, and in the military, as we saw with the RAF calling their white male pilots useless recently. So the idea that the generation you would be relying on as conscripts would want to fight this war in the first place on behalf of an idea of democracy that you have discredited as an elite cadre of politicians, that's laughable, and I don't see it happening. Do you?
No, I think you're right. And this reminds me, I think it was in 1918, when British soldiers returned from World War I, there was this campaign that was called a Home Fit for Heroes. And the idea was that, for example, the franchise, voting rights, the beginning of the welfare state, that this was an appropriate reaction to treat the people who fought and died for Britain, that they get what they're due, right? That what kind of honor bestows upon them. And I think you're right about this. And I would actually go a step further, because you say, and I agree with this, right? You also talk about people that are not particularly anchored, let's say in Britain or continental Europe, because they are hypothetically first generation immigrants. I think there's something to it, but I would go a step further. In Vienna, just to give you one example, we have schools where 90% of the pupils are not of immigrant background, they are immigrants. So if you would go into one of these school classes and recruit soldiers, you would recruit these soldiers from the 10% that actually have Austrian citizenship. So you already have parts, and I always say this particularly true in working class areas, and that's usually the economic class that does volunteer for the military or is drafted into the military. That is already a minority in their own home. And now you pull those few that are still there out there and potentially send them to die in a foreign war so that their percentage, those few then come back, is even smaller. So you basically then turn a war abroad into a war against a certain class at home. And exactly as you say, for good reasons, for completely irrational reasons, people are saying, I don't want to have any part of this. I would say the same thing because in order to fight for a home, you need to have a place where you feel at home. And exactly as you say, you live in certain parts of Vienna, Berlin, London, Birmingham, all the major Paris. You feel like a stranger in your own country, and then somebody says, and now you have to fight for the integrity of the borders of Ukraine in a faraway place. We're going to say, why? Because even if you would believe the argument that many make, that we can talk about this too, I don't think that's true, to say if we don't fight them over there, then we have to fight them over here. But I guess many people would say, but what would be worth defending over here? But this is one host. I don't want to name any names on a British talk show, I think, and we're both friendly with that host, who has kind of decided to go out very much in favor of the Ukraine thing and always asks, how much land of Britain would you be willing to give up, or how much land of Germany would you be willing to give up? Well, to be quite honest, it depends on which bits and pieces we are talking about. And this is, I think, the key problem here. If you create, as you said, a generation, not by no fault of their own, that no longer feels that they have a home, they will not be willing to defend it at all, and much less defend it abroad. And I think that is very true. The idea, you need a fairly homogeneous society for the kind of collective action that is necessary, like in an ideological sense, for a society to be capable to do collective action that involves violence or that involves war. And I would argue we no longer have that in our society. And I got this weird email. I just want to tell the story real quick, because I made the similar case that you made. And they said, yeah, that's all not true. And when Britain entered World War I and World War II, basically the state also had to drag people into conscription, because people didn't want to fight back then either. So I thought, okay, I have to look up, is this true? And if you look up when, I think Britain, correct me if I'm wrong, it was either 1915 or 1916, when they initiated the draft, based on, Neil Ferguson wrote this, I think, in his War of the World, they were initially very afraid that nobody would sign up, right? That this will lead to riots, people will refuse to join, to allow conscription. What actually happened was that the number of people volunteering was so high, they didn't know where to turn them. So this was the attitude back at the time. Right? The same was true, of course, in Germany, not so much in Austria-Hungary, again, partially because of the diversity problem, but you had this in France, the same thing. Right? People were willing to voluntarily fight to the death and kill for their countries. That no longer exists. And here's the real kick about all of this. Until 3 years ago, we were told by all the experts, the intellectuals, and the media that is a good thing, right? Only irrational people from yesteryear would think that it is a virtue to die for your country. That the famous Roman saying that dulce et honorum est pro patria mori, right? How sweet it is to die for your country. And this is something that reactionaries or proto-fascists or maybe even Nazis would say. And now they think you can switch, you can flick a switch and turn that back on. This is not how it works, exactly as you say. People have nothing to conserve. They have no home where they feel at home. They have no real economic prospects. And now you say, hey, how about fighting a war? As you say, I just don't think that this is going to work.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on fighting on behalf of a government who is very concerned with the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and fair enough, they've got a moral argument for it, while actively dismantling the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom by paying an increasing amount of money to foreign criminals who break into my country so that they can be housed in a 5-star hotel at my expense.
Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.